Hollow footfalls echoing through empty corridors. The primal reaction of flesh brushed by an unseen touch. Shadowy figures slipping between the moss-covered boles of ancient trees. Strange calls issuing from not quite human throats, piercing the stillness of the night. Unusual lights and objects streaming across darkened skies. Stolen minutes and a void filled with obscure and disturbing memories. These occurrences and more are called by many whispered names in many countries around a world we believe we know so well. All of these things share a common thread. I'm Charles Romans, and welcome to the pathways leading to the shadows of legend.
Hello, this is Charles Romans. I'm your host for Shadows of Legend. Today we're speaking with Stephen Tungate. He's the administrator of the Haunted History of Kentucky Facebook page, and he recently posted an encounter with the paranormal. How are you today, sir?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well so far. How often have you encountered the supernatural and the paranormal, or was this particular instance your first?
That's a good question. I've encountered the paranormal many times in my life. It's actually been something that's happened to me ever since I was a child. I've lived with it my whole life. I don't think it's any different than waking up and brushing my teeth because it's part of who I am. And
if you let me interrupt for just 1 second, you say waking up. What all does that entail to somebody that might not have any experience?
I do not like the word psychic. I think it's a very watered down, derogatory word that people use to make money, to be honest with you.
Okay.
That's not what I am. I am born with this, and I've had it my whole life. I've had the ability to hear and see spirits since I was born. I'm not afraid of them. I never have been. It's just when I was a child, I was afraid of them because I didn't understand what they was, and it was very scary for me, especially since they were so aggressive. But as I grew older, left home, I was able to adapt my life to include them in it, good and bad, and was able to just live my life. I've tried medication and things like that to be able to kind of, make them go away. And I have ultimately, each time I would try that, I have decided to stop doing that and to accept them into my life because they're part of it. And I am diagnosed by a psychiatrist as psychic, full on. And I asked someone about that before. They said, you got to show me the papers on that. And I said, I'm diagnosed by one of the most renowned psychiatrists in the state of Kentucky as psychic and lives in two worlds. So it's been definitely a rough road for me. But now, have me seeing full-on apparitions in front of my face, that's only happened a couple times. It's mostly voices and side-eye stuff, out of the corner of the eye, things of that nature. But as far as me seeing full-bodied apparitions, that's not happened very often.
Well, to play the devil's advocate, that type of sighting is rare anyway.
This is true. But the story that we're talking about that was on the Haunted History of Kentucky Facebook page, that was a full-on physical. I'm sure if I was close enough to touch the spirit that I would have felt him, and he was there. He was there as much as I was, or I'm not sure if he was in this world or if I was in his. But it was definitely something that I'll never forget, and the story is pretty interesting. I've been a metal detectorist for since 2008. I think is when I started. I bought a little cheap metal detector. I went out with a friend of mine, and I found an old Civil War button in an old house. And then I got my wife involved, and of course she found an old penny, old 1832 penny, and it was all for her. So me and her has been metal detecting together for a long time. And we have an entire wall full of artifacts. Ranges from belt buckles, Civil War belt buckles, all the way down to soldiers' teeth. I mean, I just collect and keep everything that I find. Not because because of their monetary value, but because I try to save it from the dirt. It's a piece of history.
You mentioned kind of a wide range of materials there. What all will this detector pick up?
Well, a lot of times I will get a signal and I will dig for an artifact and I'll find marbles. Or I'll find teeth. Sometimes I'll find a piece of lead that's been chewed on, like has teeth marks in it. And that's where the term bite the bullet comes from. What would happen was these soldiers, if they were wounded, or even if they were just having some kind of little mild surgery, they would stick a Civil War bullet in the back of their jaw, and they would bite down on it to keep their teeth from breaking from the pain.
Okay.
And so I would find these bullets usually and find teeth around them. You just never know what you're going to find when you're digging. You might dig a hole looking for a piece of metal, but after you get in there, you're digging usually in a camp area where there's all kinds of things around the metal. And you'll find there's an old saying among detectivists called always check your hole, always. So just because you find something in a hole doesn't mean there's not something else in it. So you should always check your hole. That's rule number one. So this particular morning that I'm telling this story about, it was about 9:30 in the morning. I had woken up. This was a cool morning, just a slight bit of fog, not a lot, not enough to even really mention. It was cool, like I said, and I had just recently found this camp area in the town that I live in. I didn't mention before, but I only collect artifacts really from the town that I live in because I research a lot, and there's so much that went on in my town. There was 20,000 soldiers here in 1862, and there's so much history about my town that people, they don't know the history. But I did find a camp that was hidden behind in this little forest area, and in the middle of the forest area is a small group of trees. And I had found out about it from an old-time detectorist from the 1980s. He told me that it was there and that he had dug there in the 80s. But detectors now, compared to then, is like night and day. It's like using a handsaw compared to a chainsaw. And the first day I had went there, I had found a lot of stuff, a lot of rifle parts and things of that nature. And there was another fellow who lived up the road, directly on the other side of the field where I was digging. He lived there, and me and him had made kind of a friendship. And he had found the most beautiful sword plate. It's a golden buckle with a big eagle on the front, and is holding a wreath in his hand and arrows in the other claw. And they wore that across their chest, kind of, or maybe it was across the belt. It was to hold their sword up. And so after I found out he had found that plate, it really sparked my interest in this area. And I think the first day there, I found 7 buttons, I think, off of a soldier's uniform, which is, you might dig your whole life and never find a button. So first day there, I found 7
I was
in
going
one
to say,
spot.
this sounds like a major find.
It is. The area keeps giving. It just keeps giving. Each time you go, it keeps giving. Of course, that's the way it is where I live. I mean, like I say, there's an enormous amount of artifacts here in the ground. So I got there early that morning. It was a misty fog, not too bad, but I started out into the field. I was ground balancing my detector, and I was trying to filter out all the electromagnetic fields that were around me so the detector wouldn't give false positives. And I was walking across the field, and the detector made a real loud, kind of like a piercing squeal. And it doesn't do that very often. You may go your entire life and never find anything silver, but detectors usually have a special squeal for silver. And when you hear that, you know you found something good. And I heard that sound. And I bent down, and wasn't even very deep. I just kind of laid the topsoil over, and I saw a silver cross. And I thought, wow, that's a silver cross. And the first thing that popped into my mind was a kid's toy. It's some kind of kid's toy. It's not anything of value. So I picked it up, and I kind of rubbed my finger over it, and I saw that it was silver. And then I was thinking, okay, somebody walked through here and lost a silver necklace. And then I picked it up and I went on and I started detecting, found a couple bullets, 3 or 4 bullets, Civil War bullets. And then I came back and I thought, well, I'm going to check the hole just to see if there was anything else in the hole. So I dug down a little bit, and sure enough, I found another part of that rosary. It was a rosary, and I found the center part that had a picture of Mary and Jesus on it. And so here I am. I have a cross, and I have the centerpiece where the beads would have went to. Of course, I didn't find the beads. And it just, sadness just come over me. I just felt like, this was probably here during a time of great sadness, and it was probably part of someone's life, and it was very important to them. I'm sure it was, because I'm not a Catholic, but I understand, that the rosary must be very important to a Catholic, being as, they wear them with them and carry them with them where they go, and kind of use them as a way of expressing their faith. So I was sitting there holding that, and I was thinking about the person who had dropped it and how important it must have been to them. And, if it was a soldier, then he may have had that in his hands when he died there. And at the time, I didn't know anything about the field, other than there was just a bunch of things in it.
Right.
So I was holding the rosary in my hand, and I said a prayer. And I am a minister, a licensed minister. And I was holding the rosary, and I just said, Lord, I pray for the soul that lost this, because I know it was very important to them. And I pray for their soul, Lord, that whatever they were praying for when they lost it came true, and that if you would find it in your heart to forgive them, that you would find a place for them in your kingdom. And that's what I said. And I looked up, and when I looked up, my eyes had come to the horizon, just right on top of this hill that was directly in front of me. Now I'm still on my knees, and there stood a young man. He was maybe 22 years old, and he had a blue uniform on, and I see him in my mind as plain as day. He had his full Civil War attire on. One thing that struck me as odd about it, the way he was dressed, was his hat looked like a kind of like almost like a top hat, but it was, it wasn't as tall, and the round part on top was hanging off to the side of his face. It wasn't covering his face, it was just hanging off to the side. And he was a nice looking young man, and he was staring off into the woods. He would never looked at me, and when I saw him, it scared me. I know I said I don't hardly ever get scared of things like that, but this scared me because it was so real. It was so real that I thought there was someone really standing there, and it took me a minute to even grasp in my mind that there was no one there, that this was a ghost or something. But that didn't register with me at the time. In my mind, I saw this as someone actually standing there, and I fell back onto the ground, still staring at him the whole time that I was laying in the ground, and he was covered in a fog. It didn't make it hard to see him, but the fog was around him, and in the fog was a red light, almost like someone far deep into a fog holding a red flashlight or something, and he had this red glow around him. And so, like I said, I fell back, and I kind of was shocked, and I was watching him, and he pointed to the ground, and then he disappeared, and there was no fog, there was no nothing after that. I mean, when he disappeared, there was nothing there. There was no fog on the ground, or it wasn't weather-related phenomena.
No trace whatsoever.
No trace of this man. So I stood up, I wrapped the rosary up in a piece of paper towel that I had in my pocket, and I stuck it in my pocket. And I walked up to the top of the hill where he stood, and I'm just looking around for footprints, because it was kind of muddy. I'm looking around for any sign that he was there. Anywhere that I could find any trace of him being there, there was nothing. And I took my detector, and I started searching around the area to where he was standing, and I found a lock, a large lock. And I thought, well, that's strange that there's a lock right where he was pointing. And then I got another real high signal, and I dug a brick. And it was funny because the brick rang up like silver. And it was dirty. The brick was dirty. It was thin. And I threw the brick back in the hole, and I thought no more of the brick. But I put the lock in my pocket. And it didn't dawn on me at the time that the brick may have been silver. Because
it's possible, yes.
The Union, they had silver bricks, and they melted them down and paid a lot of the soldiers with silver. There was a big chest of silver that went missing in 1863 that everybody that I know has ever had a metal detector has looked for it. Morgan supposedly buried it on that creek. Long story short, so the guy, he pointed to this lock. And for the longest time, I didn't understand why he wanted me to find that lock. So I've been back 15 times to the same spot. First of all, I can't find the brick.
Okay.
The brick is not there. I don't know what happened to it. I know that the guy that lives up the road that I was telling you about,
yes,
he didn't find the brick. And I'll get to that in a minute, why I know he didn't find a brick. Because he had an experience, too, while he was down there by himself. Me and him's the only ones that metal detect the field. We're the only ones that has permission. So I know he didn't find the brick because he didn't go back. So I went back home, and I spoke to the man who found the buckle that I was telling you about. I told him what happened about me finding the rosary and me seeing a spirit and me seeing the young man. And he said, oh, well, you're crazy. That's all it is to it. This guy's a prominent businessman. He's owns a big factory here that they make motors for big trucks and bulldozers and stuff. And he owns that factory. It makes good money. But he's a real nice guy. I mean, money don't define people. So he told me, he said, you're crazy and everything like that. And there ain't no such things as ghosts. And anybody believes that's nuts. So, the regular spiel that we mostly hear about that kind of stuff. And anyway, so at some point he went down there by himself in order to go metal detecting after he found out about me finding the rosary. He thought maybe there was some more silver down there. He had some pretty good luck last time he went there. He found a couple old silver coins, 1853 seated dimes. We even found, 1810 Spanish reals.
It would be a good place to search.
Very good, very good. And so I called him. I didn't hear anything from him for a while. I called him one day, and I said, what do you think about me and you going detecting down in the field? And he was real defensive about it. He didn't really want to talk to me.
Okay.
And when I bring up the field, he changed the subject. And I thought, well, I'll just go by myself. And so I went a couple times, and I called him up. Willis. I mean, you go to the field. I don't really feel like I should go there by myself and find everything. You should come and have your stake there too. You have permission as well as I do. And he would blow me off and he would say, no, I'm not going there. So finally, one day, I got him to go with me. We was down there about 10 minutes and I told him, I brought up the rosary again, and I told him about the soldier boy again, just kind of, almost in a joking way. Yeah, I guess the soldier boy must have been down here digging because there was holes down there, and I figured he had been down there digging. Yes. But he said he hadn't been there digging, so I don't know what done the holes. Long story short, he finally opened up and told me that he didn't want to be there anymore because he had heard something down there. Someone had said something to him, and he turned around and there was no one there. And I said, what did they say? And he said, they said, help me. And he said, I don't play with this stuff, man. He said, I don't deal with this well, so I'm done. I'm not coming back here anymore. And this man just found a sword plate, which is like finding the Holy Grail if you're a metal detector.
Well, yeah, I would assume it would be worth a good amount of money.
It is, especially from where it's from. Collectibles in this town sell for quite a bit. I have 7 of them, actually.
So it'd be interesting to find out now. You say he was a total skeptic, and he did not experience anything in this field he'd been in numerous times until after you had your encounter.
Right.
And with your encounter, had you encountered anything previously before that incident?
I had not. I had not felt or sensed anything in the field until I found that rosary. And then I saw the young man. Since then, that's changed. Every time I go, I sense something down there now. It's not malicious, though. It's more curious.
Not to interrupt, but do you think maybe your expression of sympathy may have sort of activated this activity?
I do. And plus, too, when I'm there, I talk out loud while I'm digging. Okay. And I don't ask them, hey, can you help me find this? Boy, I sure would like to find that. I don't do that because, it reminds me of what the scripture says about it's a wicked, perverse generation that seeks a sign. I remember that. And so I just talk out loud and just kind of tell them, whoever's there that I'm there, make aware of that I'm there to preserve history,
so
not
just
to...
as a form of respect, as it were.
Right. Not a grave robber.
So you think maybe, not to judge your neighbor harshly, but you think maybe he wasn't quite as respectful as you were?
I don't believe he is. He's fairly new to the hobby, and he hasn't gotten the tenure of there's a strict code of rules that we go by as metal detectors, so a lot of people don't follow them, but they're rules of respect for the land and for the people who own the land, and especially and one of the main rules is we do not detect grave sites regardless. If we find an area that we dig in it, we later on find it is a grave site, we'll either alert someone or we'll take the stuff back.
I mean, it is one thing, of course, to stumble into something by accident, but to intentionally invade someone's final resting place would be something entirely different.
Amen. I found I found a hole in the middle of a field, just a perfectly round hole. It's a large hole, but it's the indentation wasn't so deep. This is a different field, and I did find a large gold ring in the hole. And I did a lot of research. Found out in like 1840s there was a house there, and yes. I do believe that that's a grave site. That I dug that ring out of. It was a large woman's wedding ring. So I do plan on reburying that in the hole, regardless of what it's worth. But back to the story of the soldier. My friend there, like I said, he decided he wasn't going to go back anymore, and I went back a couple times. Come to find out, there was one thing that he found that I wanted very badly, of course, besides the buckle. But I've always wanted, in all my years of detecting, to find an L&N railroad padlock.
Okay.
That's my pet peeve. I would pay $100, $200 in a minute to have one, and they're not even worth $50.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, what's the attraction to this? And can you describe what this is?
Well, our town sprung up in the 1800s because of the L&N Railroad. It was a railroad that went through our town and brought passengers here from Nashville, and it took them up to Louisville. It's the Louisville-Nashville Railroad. It's very rare to find artifacts that pertain to the trains that come through the town. I have a whistle of one of the trains, a steam whistle that I found, and every detectorist has kind of a pet peeve about things they collect. There's a guy that collects collections that I know, he just collects things that are collectible. He might collect different year pull tabs. It doesn't have any real value to it, but it does to him. So there's different types of things that people collect, and mine is train parts.
I see.
So I've always wanted one of these locks, and there's a couple guys that detect around town that aren't, they just detect that for the monetary value of it. They sell things as soon as they find them, and that really bothers me because I'm trying to get a museum started here in our town, and they all found L&N Railroad locks. Everybody's found one, and I have never found one. I have found more Civil War stuff than anybody I know. Like I said, I think the first year I detected, I found 5 Civil War belt buckles, and each one of them is very valuable. One of them even has a spot where the bullet went through it.
Now, do you have these? I know you said you're going to start a museum, but you have a display of these that people can look at?
I do. I have a largest display in my home, an entire wall in my home full of stuff. A lot of people come by and look at them, but we're working on towards getting a display in town here in Lebanon. So this lock has eluded me, and everyone else has one, and I don't. It's just a padlock. It says L&N on it. And so the day before I had saw the soldier, I had been down there with the guy I was telling you about, the friend up the road, and sure enough, he found an L&N Railroad lock. And he come over, and I asked him, I said, "Did you find anything?" He said, "No, just this junky lock." And I looked at it, and I said, "I'll give you $100 for it right now." And he looked at me puzzled, and he said, "No, I think I'll keep it." And I was like, "Man, really?" He said, "Yeah, I think I'll keep it," because I think he knew that he had something, because I so quickly jumped on a $100 bill there.
Right.
And I think that's what the soldier was showing me. He was showing me this lock because the previous day before, he must have been there. He must have heard my voice, how much I wanted this lock. And come to find out, just the other day, 2-3 days ago, I got that lock out after I told this story on that website. It had such a huge read that I got that lock out and I started cleaning on it. And it's made of brass, but it has the numbers 4H on it. And I looked that lock up on the internet, and it is a L&N Railroad lock.
Interesting.
Yep. And I do think that's what he wanted. He wanted me to have an L&N Railroad lock.
So you think that it was an intelligent interaction? He was responding in kind?
I do. I think he appreciated the gesture that I had made with the prayer. And I prayed, like I said, I prayed for his salvation and that he would be able to find peace and leave the field. And I think that was a kind gesture towards me to help me find the L&N Railroad lock.
Now, have you had any other sightings or, I guess, audio experiences in the same field?
Not in that field, but I will tell you that in another field not very far from there was an old fort. It was called Fort Ben Spalding, and the fort is, of course, it's long gone, and now they're covering it with factories, but there's still the trenches there that the soldiers dug, and in the center of the trenches they had large cannons. It was an outpost to guard the east end of town, and I have been there and I have been digging, and I see out of the corner of my eye somebody in a blue, and I will turn to look and there'll be nobody there. And I did that once. I saw someone in blue, and I turned and I looked. There was nobody there. I went to the spot and dug, and I found a buckle, a U.S. buckle. So the soldiers are definitely still here.
Well, now your story so far seems to imply that these soldiers are tied to physical items that are littering these fields where they once fought.
Amen. I do believe that. Now, the field, I did research on the field, the first field I was telling you about. I come to find out that there was a makeshift hospital there. I found some diary entries from a soldier who was very sick. He was writing basically his wife to tell her that he was ill, but he had stayed in that field and that it was a makeshift hospital for yellow fever. So I think that that's why there was so much death and so many artifacts in the field. So they are tied to objects. I have a lot of objects, and I have brought things home with me, and
See, that kind of leads me to the next question I was going to ask. Since they're tied to these objects, aren't you hesitant to take these objects into your home?
Well, that goes back to me, living with this my whole life is, I'm not afraid of these things, so they have no power over me, and I can remove them fairly easily. I can cast them out with, basically without even doing anything. So when I was a child, they terrified me up until the point that I was 14, 15 years old. Wow. And then I got to the point to where my brother had the same thing that I have. We call it a family curse, but the older I get, the more I realize that that's not true. It's a gift. But my brother had the same thing, and he died at age 42 because of it. I was young when he died. I was only probably 20, maybe. But I remember being 8 years old, 9 years old, sitting on the couch watching my brother screaming at the walls. And of course, anybody with any type of background in mental, any type of mental background would say, oh, well, this person's mentally deranged. They're schizophrenic and they need to be put in a hospital and medicated. And sure enough, they did that to my brother. And they put him on some experimental medications that ultimately killed him, when he was 42 years old. So I decided that if I was schizophrenic, if I was messed up, if there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't going out like that. I decided that I wasn't going to stand by and let these things do to me what they did to my brother. So I started standing up to them. I started sticking that chest out. And when they stepped, I stepped harder. And when giants came, I stepped to them. And I didn't have any fear of it after a while. After a while, I didn't even have fear of death. They would threaten death, I'd bring it. I didn't care anymore about that because I wasn't afraid. And that's put me into a whole different demographic. That's put me into a place of strength. And after, I think about 2008, I started going and ghost hunting and looking for them because I felt angry in my heart about my brother. I felt angry because they, had tortured him and tortured us our whole lives. So I went looking for retribution. I wasn't happy ghost hunting with friends and skipping around haunted houses and giggling. I was going out to find them and hunt them down. And I was going to make them pay for what they did. And I looked in dark places, man. I'm not going to lie to you. I looked in places people shouldn't go. But I found my answers. I found what I was looking for. And that's another story about a scary, scary place. But
now, if you don't care, not to bring up bad memories, but you said when you were very young that this was torment. What did that entail? Just terrifying apparitions or noises? Give me a little bit of a background on that, if you don't mind.
We lived in a house that my father was a collector. He collected odd things and he collected valuable things, mostly related to Indians. We had I think in 1975, we had the largest Indian collection in the state of Kentucky. They actually did an article on my father. He had boxes full of bones, skeletons, and peace pipes and gorgets. You couldn't imagine the things that we had, dovetails and all kinds of oddities. So I grew up with those in the house, and they had a lot of negative stigma on them. Each thing in the house had a spirit with it, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So the house was full of spirits, and a lot of them were very negative. They wasn't good at all. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever even remember a good one in the house. But, of course, my father having the same, I'm not going to call it an illness. I almost called it an illness. My father had the same issue we did. It was inherited through him.
I see.
And his father had it too. We all could see and hear. So my father decided instead of dealing with it, he would drink, and he would drink and drink a lot. And I mean, what nothing for him to knock out 30 beers before bed after he got off work. And that was his way of dealing with it.
So you think he was just trying to silence the noise so he didn't have to deal with it?
I know that's what he was doing. He silenced it, so he didn't have to deal with it. But really, he brought all this negativity into our home with all these artifacts that he had found, and him not dealing with it made us have to deal with it. So these spirits had a really bad negative attachment onto him, and he was very, very mean at times, and he made our home life very hard, and he was rough on us. He was a good dad. Now, don't get me wrong about that. But he made it hard on us. I remember eating my cereal on Saturday morning with a pistol cocked to the back of my head and told if I turned around that that'd be the last thing I'd ever know.
You ever given any justification for that?
Demons. Evil demons is what done that to them, to all of us. And I believe that with all my heart because I fought demons my whole life. Ever since I've been little, I fought demons. I remember them floating around in the room. They looked like giant floating garbage bags, and they would float all around in the room when I was just 3 or 4 years old. I remember that. I remember rolling over in the bed and looking down beside the bed, and there would be some kind of creature laying on the floor looking back up at me, and then it would slide under the bed real quick. I remember that. I remember waking up and having people in the bed with me, and it wasn't my mother, and they would crawl underneath the covers, and they would crawl up towards me in the bed. I remember being so scared that I couldn't even breathe. I would be so scared as this is when I was 6, 7 years old. And this was the devil's way of making sure that I never stepped to him. That's what he wanted. He sent his best. And he wanted to make absolute sure that none of us ever stepped to him. So he made sure that he got us when we were children. And he made sure that people thought we were crazy. And he made sure that everyone took their medicine, no matter how bitter it tasted. So I was lucky. I stood up and I fought it.
It kind of begs the question, how? I mean,
How
I'm not being facetious. I mean, how does one fight something like that?
Well, a lot of that is because of my brother, his death. It's one thing to say a man is fearless, but it's another thing to be fearless. In order to be fearless, you have to have something that you believe in more than life and more than something that death can't touch. And that is, of course, for me, the Lord Jesus. I've always used that as my anchor. My mother combated the things that was going on in our early life with Jesus. She would always tell me, no matter where you are, no matter what's chasing you, no matter what is happening, run to Jesus. Run. And that's what I've always done my whole life. So when I would go into these places, I would look for people's homes that had demons in them. And I would say, take the night off and you come back, they'll be gone. And I wanted to sit down and have a one-on-one with them. I wanted to have that conversation. And you know what? A lot of times I did, because they didn't have anything in me. They couldn't do anything to me. So the only thing they could do is just stop and recognize what we have, and that is authority. So I have authority over them, and they recognize my authority. And authority in the spirit world is everything. Only authority over men is Jesus, and only authority over Jesus is God. So we as men have the authority over all spirits, anything that's dead, especially, or anything that's of evil nature. I did meet a spirit one time when I was a child that is also on the Haunted History of Kentucky page. I shared this story. I think I might be the only person that ever punched a skinwalker in the face. I think I told your wife about this.
She did mention that, yes. So how did this transpire?
Well, me and my friends, we was 14 years old, and we decided to go hiking up in the woods in front of my house. We lived in a heavily wooded area, and like I said, my dad was a collector of artifacts, and he knew quite a bit about them. And so we decided to climb the hill in front of my house, which is about a mile straight up in the air, really steep. And on top of the hill is a cliff that goes back into a kind of a cliff area. And there's a perfectly carved square door. And the square door goes back into the cliff. And I had 4 older brothers. The only one I ever knew that went into the door was my oldest brother. One of my older brothers had crawled in there maybe 20 feet. He'd come back out. But nobody ever went into the little door. It looked like a door that was carved into these rocks, or the rocks was laid into a square fashion, and then it was covered over with dirt. But you could tell that this door went back into some kind of place, into a hillside. So we went up there, and I wanted to show them the little door into the hillside. This is in the middle of the woods, in the middle of nowhere. I don't think anybody could, if I showed you, you couldn't find it. Even if I probably gave you the geographical coordinates, you couldn't find it. We went there, and they were scared. They didn't want to go into the door. This place had a vibe to it. When you were there, it was just, you had the vibe you shouldn't be there in this place. Very heavy air. Even on a pretty sunny summer day, it was extremely heavy. So I decided we was bored. We was standing around at this place on top of the cliff. We was out of breath. We was hungry and thirsty. We was talking about going back home. And I decided I was going to dig around in front of the door. And I dug around and I pulled out a bone that looked like a rib bone. And the bone had all these little notches carved in it. And it had little stars. If I remember correctly, it had stars and moons and things carved into this bone. And it was odd looking. And it was maybe 6 inches long, kind of yellow. So I stuck the bone in my pocket. And I thought, well, I'm going to take that back home and show Dad. So we went on our way. We scurried back home, 2.5-hour walk down this massive hill. And then, so I got home and Daddy was there and I showed him the bone. And I don't know if it struck him or if something come through to him from the bone. He looked at the bone, he held it in his hand, he looked up to me and he said, I don't care where you got this at. and I don't care how long it takes you, and I don't care if you're out in the woods just all night long, you take this back where you got it right now. And I told him, I said, I'm not going in these woods in the dark. That's crazy.
I was going to say that's a bit of an extreme order there.
I don't know. There was something about the bone that didn't sit well with him. I figured he would took it and put it in with the rest of his stuff, but
well, you would think,
no,
yes.
He didn't like it. He didn't want it. I told him where I had gotten it from, and he did not want it in our home. And like I said, he may have picked something up off that bone that I didn't. So I took the bone in the house and I laid it on my chest of drawers beside my bed where I sleep. Never thought anything about it, except that it was cool. You know, it was a cool looking thing to have. We talked about it.
And how old were you at the time?
I was about 14.
You see, you would be much more impressed being younger.
Yes, I was very strong when I was 14. I could pick up a truck. I was about 280 pounds, and I was very strong. I was a big, strong, country home-fed boy, you know.
Yes.
And so, like I said, before that in my life, I had been dealing with spirits. They still scared me at that point. I was still afraid of them. So I woke up about 3:30 in the morning, 3:30, I can't remember exactly, but it was late. And I went to sleep, and I had woken up, and there was someone standing in the door. And I was laying in a bunk bed. I had a bunk bed in my room, but I was the only one that slept in there. I slept on the bottom bunk. And I looked out the corner of my eye towards the door, and there was a man standing there. He had a kind of a fedora hat on, rounded hat, and which is odd because I don't understand why he would be attached now to this bone. But I guess he was some form of lesser demon. But he stood there for a second, and I just glared at him, and then I jumped at him, like kind of to punk him out, you know, like, huh, you know, like that. And then he went from standing to crouching without ever moving in between. It was instantaneous. It was like stand, crouch. Now he was crouching, total black silhouette within 6 feet of me. So I closed my eyes and I just was like, I didn't understand what was happening. And he was gone. He had disappeared. So I don't know how, but I did fall back asleep, and I woke back up about an hour later, and there was a very large silhouette of a woman standing in the door. My grandmother was a large woman, and she used to keep her dresses in a little makeshift closet that was in the hallway right there where I was seeing this thing at. So I thought, well, that's my mama. That's my grandma. Then I noticed that, it never moved. It stood there. Just this big outline of a large woman in a large dress, almost like somebody cut it out of cardboard, black cardboard. And it was sitting there. And then I just stared at it. And then I watched it turn and float down the hall. It didn't walk, it floated. Drug its feet as it floated down the hall. I heard its feet hitting the floorboards. And this is a small house. This is a house, 3-bedroom house with no upstairs, no basement. It was a small house. So by this time, I'm freaking out. You know, I'm like, what is going on? And I have no idea how, and I still think to this day how I went back to sleep. But I did go back to sleep, and I don't know how I went back to sleep. But I woke up to a Indian standing in the door. Same thing, cardboard cutout, full headdress, looked just like an Indian. And he was a black silhouette. And he made sure that I made contact with him. And then he turned and he floated back down the hallway. So at this point, I'm bugging out. You know, did I get into some mold or something? Or what happened to me? You know, did I mix bleach with ammonia? I didn't know what was going on. So it's almost like each time something would happen, I would fall back asleep. And a lot of people said I was dreaming, but you don't wake up with black eyes and your throat collapsed from dreaming. I woke up at some point in the night. It had to be early morning, and there was a creature sitting on my chest. I woke up because I couldn't breathe, and there was a creature sitting on my chest, and the creature it was the shape of a man, but it had long, oblong black eyes, like some of those things you see on TV, like to call grays.
Yes.
And it had all the flesh from its jaws removed. All there was like pieces of rotted flesh still on its jaws. Its gums were black, and it had the teeth in its mouth wasn't human. They were more like cat or shark teeth. They were extremely sharp. They were all pointed, and this thing was looking, and it had hair, but the hair looked rotted, and its ears were cat-like, and the ears were rotted, and they were broken. And this thing was on top of me. It had me by the throat, and it was snarling at me with these big, sharp, shark-like teeth, and just... I'll never forget I'll never forget this thing ever, as long as I live. The terror that it put into me.
I was going to say, it sounds like a completely terrifying experience.
My friend, it was beyond terrifying. It had me by the throat, and it was squeezing, and I could feel it going tighter, tighter. I feel myself blacking out, and I knew if I blacked out, that was it. That was it. And I've had people call me a liar about this, because I had one guy saying there was no way I could have ever struck this thing with my arm laying flat on my back. But I got my left arm loose, and I hit this thing like Sugar Ray Leonard. I mean, I hit this thing so hard with the adrenaline that I had going through my body and the fear that I had in me at that time. If I'd hit anything else, it would have probably killed it. And I remember hitting it, and it was like hitting a burlap sack full of bones. There was just bones. That was all it was. It was just like a mesh of bones just rattling when I hit it. And I blacked out. That was the last thing I remember, was hitting it and blacking out. So I woke up the next morning, and I could barely even move, and my neck was covered in bruises. I was black and all over my neck, and I had a black eye. And I went into the kitchen, and I said, "Mama," and Mama, she kind of jumped on me because she thought that I had gotten in a fight.
Well, that would be a common reaction, yes.
Yeah, she said, who have you been fighting? Where have you been? Have you been drinking? Have you been fighting somebody? Because I've always been a lover, not a fighter. I can't tell you. I've been in maybe 2 fights in my whole life. And so I told Mama, what happened. My mama's the type of person, she was, well, we don't talk about this. We don't talk about this anymore. We never bring it up again. So it was just never brought up again in our household that this thing existed. Well, this thing it's been on my mind my entire life. So about a year ago, I saw an article on a local historian website about a tomb that was found very close to where this hill is, within miles of this hill, maybe not even miles. Just down the side of the knob over into a field, they found a bunch of tombs. And inside these tombs were beasts, and they said they were humanoid figures, but they were 8 foot tall, and their bones were mixed with animals, and their teeth had been pulled and replaced with cat teeth. And that really intrigued me. I've got the article. It's on the Haunted History of Kentucky page as well if you want to see the article.
See, I was going to ask if you had that on the page so people could follow up.
Yes. Well, these beings, they had their heads resting on a crystal called mica, and they were in a clock kind of arrangement inside of the tomb. There was 11 of them, ranging even for children, but they were all, very deformed, and their heads were extremely large. Some of them had 2 rows of teeth. This was about 1929, I think. So I'm reading this article, and I'm just completely amazed by it because it sounds like what I saw. This
it does
thing
resemble
that attacked,
it, yes.
Yes, and it's very close to the same area. Well, I got to digging, and I finally found out that there was a race of Indian called the Adena. And the Adena Indians were very tall. The tallest on record that they found so far is in Dover, Ohio, and he was pushing 9 foot. And Micah isn't from this area. It's from Mexico. So, like I said, these beings in this tomb, their heads were resting on mica. That made me think that maybe they come up here after the fall of the Aztecs, but they're much older than that. They had to come up here during some form of trading with corn, probably, or trading with the local Indians. But these guys here, these Adena Indians, they believed in mixing with their spirit animal. So they would replace parts of themselves, for example, their teeth, with the teeth of animals. And they did do things like remove the flesh from their jaws, and they would deform themselves to look very scary. And when the chief died, he was usually the tallest. And when the chief died, they sacrificed his entire family, and they built them. The tombs looked exactly like the place where the door is. They looked almost identical. The tombs that I saw were identical to the place where the door is into the hillside.
So how does this match up with the apparition that you encountered?
The apparition, I believe, was one of the chiefs or one of the spirits of the Adena. I think they believed, from what I've read, there's nothing known about them other than the little statues and things that they have found that are very Aztec-like. But I know that they believed that when they died, that they would mutilate themselves and mix their bones with animals. One skeleton actually had the jawbone of a large cat, and his jawbone was removed. They don't know if perhaps he done that while he was alive. Of course, we know now that that wouldn't work. It's probably the reason he died, but a lot of the bones would be mixed with animals. And I think they believed in the spirit world that they would come back as an animal-type humanoid creature. And, of course, I seen one, so I believe this too. So if it hadn't been for me slugging him, I think I probably wouldn't be here.
So now, do you think that encounter was with a physical creature, or was it a spiritual creature, or some weird combination of the two?
I think it was a spiritual creature that was able to attack me in my dream. But I don't know how my neck got bruised like it did, like I'd been strangled. And I mean, it took a week to get over that. And my eyes got blackened. I've had people tell me that I struck myself in my sleep. I've been to doctors about it. I've had therapy. They tell me, "Oh, you struck yourself." So I don't think I struck myself. I think I legitimately had a fight with this thing. I believe that it attacked me because I had the bone. I took a bone of one of them, and
well, I mean that would be justification for that from their standpoint.
Yes, and I've never been back there since. And I've had a lot of people ask me where it is, and I won't tell them.
My next question, of course, is, did you return the bone?
The next morning, as soon as I got up, explained what happened, the bone went back. As fast as I could climb that hill, I went back, and that was the last time I ever been there.
So what other, and that was an amazing encounter, terrifying to be sure, but did you have any other encounters from that point on with anything?
After the bone was returned, I never had an encounter with that particular creature. I tell you one time that I did see a creature that was similar to that. It was years later. It was probably 18 years ago. We were living in a house in Camelsville, Kentucky, and it was way out in the woods. We hadn't lived in this house long, but we kept hearing footsteps in it and things like that. So I knew it was haunted. And at that point, I was to the point in my life to where I wasn't afraid. So it just didn't bother me. They have their place and I have mine. And as long as they stay out of my place, we're fine. Mm. But this was something a lot darker than what I had anticipated. We lived on top of this big, round, weird hill, of course, in the middle of nowhere. And I had thrown a chair at a cat who was digging in the flower bed. And when I throwed the chair, I did not mean to hit the cat. So don't be sending me nasty messages, people. But I snapped the cat's neck. It was a very bad accident. My kids went ballistic. They were so mad about what had happened. And I felt so guilty over that poor cat. I took the cat and I buried it beside the house. And that night I woke up and I saw one of those things with the big black eyes and the sharp teeth. I can't tell you if it was the same one or not, but it looked a lot like the one that I had saw as a child, the one that I saw from the hill. It had very long black eyes. It had all sharp teeth, and the skin was removed from its jaws, and it was just covered in rotting flesh, basically, it was like a rotting human trying to pretend like it's a cat by covering itself with rotting cat fur. Okay. Is basically what this thing looks like. And that was the only time I'd ever actually seen another one, was that day. This may be something that was following me at that time, or something that had been, maybe followed me all those years. I don't know, but it definitely was there the day the cat died.
So, of course, you've had a lot of different experiences over the years, like you said, from childhood. There are, however, typically 3 camps when it comes to the supernatural. There's people who believe in it. It's one camp. The second camp is people who don't believe in it. And then there's the third camp of people who are kind of on the fence. They want to be a little open-minded, but they're not really sure. How would you address those different beliefs?
Well, we can look at that. We can look at that question by looking at religion. And I don't want to discredit or denounce anyone's religion, but you have people that say they believe in Jesus. They go to church every Sunday, but they don't ever talk about him. They don't pray when they're at home. They don't pray before they eat. They just assume that Jesus knows who they are and that they're good. And then you'll say something to these people and they're like, well, I've gotten my relationship my way with him. I know how things are. But the only time they'll ever mention Jesus is at church. That's the only time they ever pray.
Okay.
Is at church. And that's a lot of time with the paranormal. People say they don't believe in spirits. They say that these things don't exist until it's in their face. And then when it's in their face, they're forced to change their attitude about it. And it's the same way with, like I say, with Jesus and religious ideology. When we die, it's in our face. I mean, I've been around a lot of people that's passed away, unfortunately. And, you know, the first thing they do at their time of death is they start crying out to the Lord Jesus. Most of these people never cried out to him in their entire life. They never even mentioned the man. But now they're crying out to him. And I'm sure that he had mercy on their soul, because it tells us in scriptures he had mercy on the soul of the thief. He says, surely today you'll walk with me in heaven. And at death, yes, he can have mercy upon your soul. But it's just funny. It's like, I'm trying to make a correlation between the two, that people that don't believe in the paranormal, like my friend who was in the field, when it's there in your face, you can't deny it. You can't say it doesn't exist. You're forced. You're forced to believe it. You're forced into that world. Your uncertainty is gone, and now you're just a speck. You're a speck in a mountain of questions and a mountain of wonder and a mountain of fear, sometimes fear. And then you don't go metal detecting anymore. You're scared to leave your house. You're afraid to say the wrong thing. So I would tell anyone who was feeling that way to find your sticking place, find your courage. You can live in a world with these things, no matter how good or bad or whatever it is. You can live in a world with these things. You have to find what gives you strength. And whatever that is, use it. Use it to protect yourself, protect your family, and to help others. That's most important.
That would seem to be solid advice.
I hope so, because I'm on the spot.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us and share some of your experiences and your insights. And hopefully we will have you on again soon to share more.
I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, and you have a wonderful afternoon.
You too.
This is Charles Romans, and on behalf of myself and our guests, thank you for joining us on this walk through the shadows of legend. If you like what you heard, please follow us and visit our website at shadowsoflegend.com and support our Patreon page to help keep the content flowing. And if you would like to be a guest and share your own brush with a stranger paranormal, don't hesitate to email us and include a contact number. The strange and surreal, the normal and the paranormal are all aspects of the world in which we live. As you reflect upon the stories we have shared, keep in mind that the people sharing these stories are actual, real people just like us. Were the stories shared compelling enough to be given credibility, or should they be relegated to the deeper part of the shadows? But when determining this, it might be a good idea to keep an open mind, because when we look around, we might discover that our own world is less brightly lit than we once thought. Until next time, I'll be waiting for you in the shadows of legend.